Letitia James didn't just walk into that diner. She disrupted it. At 9:04 p.m. on a rain-soaked Tuesday in Queens, the New York Attorney General stepped through the squeaky glass door of a half-empty corner joint that smelled like burnt toast and broken dreams. No press, no entourage, no flash of authority, just a soaked trench coat, boots that had walked through worse, and a voice that didn't ask. It stated, "Black coffee, and a little quiet, if there's any left in this city." Emily Dawson heard it before she saw her. 25 years old, faded apron, sleeves rolled up, wiping the same table for the fourth time long after the last tip had dried and the last customer had stopped pretending to care. The girl's hands paused mid-wipe. Her eyes flicked to the woman now sliding into a booth near the window, raindrops still clinging to her sleeves like she wasn't in a rush to brush them off. Emily blinked, then whispered to herself, "That's Letitia James?" The realization hit harder than the cold, not because of who Letitia was, but where she chose to be. This wasn't campaign territory. This was exile. This was where you worked because you had nowhere left to fall. The diner, small and fluorescent lit, buzzed with the hum of an old fridge and the occasional cough from a sleeping customer in the corner. Emily poured the coffee with hands that had carried too much and broke too little. She placed the cup down gently, her voice practiced but tired. "Not many folks in tonight. You picked the right booth." Letitia met her eyes. Calm, direct, noticing more than she said. "You're not from New York." Emily froze, not in fear, but recognition. She didn't ask how the woman knew. She just said it. "No. Pennsylvania. Just arrived." Letitia didn't blink. "Is it better here?" There was a pause, too short to be hesitation, too long to be casual. "I didn't come here for better," Emily said, her voice quiet but sharpened at the edges. "I came here because I couldn't stay." Letitia nodded once. That was all. No sympathy, no platitude, just acknowledgement. And after that, she didn't ask another question. She didn't need to. Her eyes, though, never left the girl who didn't flinch when truth spilled out, just stood there with her rag and her pride, too tired to lie and too broken to pretend. That moment, though quiet, wasn't small. Because Letitia James had come into that diner looking for silence. What she found instead was a story trying not to be told. And in the stillness of a nearly empty room, beneath flickering bulbs and a clock that ticked louder than the customers breathed, something clicked. She had come for coffee, but she stayed for Emily. She hadn't touched her coffee. Neither had Letitia. They just sat there, one staring into a bitter brew, the other into a bitter past. The soup-slurping man 3 booths down could have been a statue for all anyone noticed. The silence stretched until it cracked, and Emily, still gripping the cloth napkin like it might unravel her nerves, finally said it. "I know who you are." Letitia didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just waited, like she'd heard that line 1,000 times and was still deciding whether it mattered. "I saw you on TV," Emily continued, "going after the Wall Street creeps. Those guys who think taxes are for peasants and women are just HR liabilities." Letitia's lips barely twitched. "Not just them," she replied dryly. "Also the ones who treat women like property and then whine like victims when the property walks away." Her eyes stayed on the fogged-up glass, but Emily saw it. The flicker of fight behind the calm. The kind of composure that doesn't come from therapy, but from winning courtroom brawls where billionaires bring their lawyers in packs. And then, suddenly, it spilled. "I had a husband," Emily said, breath shallow. "He punched me 3 times for asking to quit a second job. Smashed my phone across the kitchen floor. Locked me out in 30 degrees so I could, quote, learn to be grateful. There it was. Not a sob story, a goddamned indictment. I left when he was passed out on the couch, she continued. High as hell. Took $83 in my state ID. No police report, no medical paper trail. Just a rib that clicks when I lie down, and a hand that still trembles when I hear boots hit the porch. Letitia placed her coffee down, not like someone startled, but like someone loading a weapon. And you chose New York, she said slowly. One of the most expensive cities in America, just to survive? Emily looked up, and in that moment she didn't look like a waitress or a runaway or a victim. She looked like someone who'd stopped expecting applause. No, she said, voice firm. I didn't come here to survive. I came to start over. I came to live again. And that hit differently. Because the city is full of women who survive. But it's rare to meet one who dares to live again, especially after being turned into a statistic, then blamed for it. Letitia reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a card, flipped it over, and scrawled something on the back. Her handwriting was sharp, almost surgical. She slid it across the table like a courtroom exhibit. Come see me, she said. Not for me, for you. There was no sales pitch, no pretense of sisterhood or solidarity, just an offer made between two women who knew exactly what kind of men hide behind the word husband and what kind of silence protects them. Some men drink too much. Some snort their paycheck. Others just worship power and use fists when words don't make her flinch. But what really damns them isn't the bruises. It's the comfort they have knowing no one will ask questions, because the bruises fade. But the silence? That sticks. It's bipartisan, tax-exempt, and too often legally irrelevant. Letitia knew that. Emily lived it. And this moment? This wasn't charity. It was triage. And the woman across from her didn't wear a cape. She carried a pen and the authority to flip a script most courts don't even read. Whatever Emily decided next, the needle had moved. And somewhere outside, beneath a flickering street lamp and the exhaust cloud of a passing bus, the city exhaled. Not because something had ended, but because something dangerous had just begun. Now the real question wasn't whether Emily would take the card. It was what she'd do once she did. 3 days later, the phone rang again. This time, she almost didn't pick up. Unknown number, no voicemail, probably a scam or worse, him. But something in her gut, the same gut that once told her to grab her ID and leave that house barefoot at 2 a.m., said, "Answer." "Miss Dawson?" A voice came through, sharp, efficient, and female. "This is Sylvia from the Attorney General's office. Letitia James would like to meet you. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Emily stared at the phone like it had grown teeth. Then she looked down at her chipped nails, her apron stained with last night's gravy, and the one decent button-down shirt still pretending to be white. 10 seconds of disbelief. Then she muttered, "Okay." The next morning, she boarded a train before sunrise. Hair tied back, collar stiff with hope and desperation. She sat in silence, the hum of the tracks louder than her thoughts. She didn't know why she was being summoned. Maybe it was a follow-up. Maybe some kind of background check. Maybe, she thought with a twinge of absurdity, they had rules about people like me sitting at booths like that. But what she found in Brooklyn wasn't a grand marble courthouse or a state-sponsored cathedral of self-righteousness. It was an old government building with peeling trim and the smell of burnt coffee embedded in its drywall. No receptionist, no cameras. Just one door slightly ajar, and inside, Letitia James already seated, already waiting. No handshake, no headline-friendly smile, just one question, delivered without fluff. "You okay?" Emily sat slowly, hands in her lap, still breathing, still shaking. Letitia nodded. No theatrics, just facts. She pulled a folder from her leather briefcase and opened it like it was an X-ray. Inside, a vocational program application, a letter of recommendation, and a referral to a local women's center with job placement assistance. "This isn't charity," Letitia said, her voice firm but not cold. "This is a pivot." Emily looked down at the forms like they might burn her fingers. School, work, a place that didn't serve burnt hash browns or side-eyes. She hadn't dared to imagine that in years. Letitia didn't wait for gratitude. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed like a lawyer waiting for cross-examination. "You're going to need to finish the coursework. You're going to have to show up. And one day, someone's going to walk into that center with the same look you had, and you'll tell her what you just told me." Emily swallowed hard. "I'm not sure I'm brave enough to say it out loud again." Letitia didn't blink. "You already said it to the right person. That was the hardest part. Now you say it to the next." It was such a simple line, clean, quiet, and lethal in its truth. Because what no one ever tells survivors is this: the second hardest thing isn't leaving. It's not testifying. It's repeating yourself. Telling the story not for sympathy, not for headlines, but because the cycle only breaks when someone else recognizes the pattern. And yet, in that room, the absurdity of American justice loomed large. The fact that a state official had to personally pull a battered woman into safety like she was scooping her out of a well because the system prefers its victims in hospital beds or graves, that was the real scandal. Letitia James wasn't offering a golden parachute. She was offering a ladder, one rung at a time, in a country where most women are told to be grateful for being ignored. She didn't promise a miracle. She handed Emily a pen, and somehow that felt bigger. Emily signed the form slowly, not with flourish, not with fear. Just a slight tremble and a name written in full for the first time in years. As she pushed the paper back across the desk, Letitia nodded once. "You're already brave, Emily," she said. "You just haven't caught up to it yet." And with that, the girl who once thought napkins were safer than courtrooms walked out with something sturdier. Paperwork. Because sometimes the most radical thing a woman can carry out of a government office is a plan. What she did with it next? That would be up to her. But one thing was certain. She wasn't invisible anymore. She didn't cry walking into court. That had been spent wrung out of her during the nights she woke gasping from dreams that weren't dreams, just reruns of what she survived. The courthouse wasn't grand. No pillars of liberty, no wood-paneled heroism. Just a low ceiling room with flickering lights and scuffed floors, like justice here was on a budget. No cameras, no reporters, not even a stenographer with decent posture. But Emily Dawson showed up anyway, button-down ironed, spine borrowed from somewhere deeper than fear. And then he walked in. The man who used to own her voice. Gutter thin now, hair slicked back like a caricature of a washed-up rock star who never had a band. Eyes like puddles of oil. Dark, reflective, and incapable of absorbing light. He smirked the second he saw her, as if the bruises he left had been romantic misunderstandings, not felony-grade trauma. The smirk didn't last long. "Miss Dawson," the attorney began, gently but with steel underneath. "Do you remember the last time he laid hands on you?" Emily didn't blink. "Yes," she said. "It was in the kitchen. He'd thrown my phone against the fridge. I crawled across broken tile to reach it. My head was bleeding. My jaw was locked. I used my coat as a pillow on the floor because I wasn't allowed on the couch. I couldn't breathe, but I held onto the phone, just in case. No gasps, no pounding gavels, just stillness. That awful, public kind of silence that only courtrooms and funerals can afford. The judge took notes. The bailiff looked at his shoes. And the defense attorney, a man who probably cut his teeth defending DUI execs and frat boys with trust funds, cleared his throat like he was choking on his own relevance. He didn't push. He didn't even cross-examine. Because even in a system built to ignore women, there comes a point when denial is too tacky to sell. There wasn't much physical evidence. A couple of old ER records from Pennsylvania. No photos, no police reports, no dramatic 911 audio to play for effect. Just a woman who dared to speak plainly, and a man who looked like he'd just realized his lawyer wasn't Harry Houdini. Still, the law demands paperwork, so the judge sighed, flipped a few pages, and granted a long-term protective order. It was anticlimactic, like winning a battle with a whisper instead of a bang. But Emily didn't come for applause. She came for distance. Outside the courtroom, she didn't say a word. She just stood frozen, staring at the courthouse steps as if expecting some invisible weight to follow her out. Letitia James stepped beside her. No press briefing, no Instagram story, just presence. Real presence. The kind that doesn't ask if you're okay. It just knows you're not, but respects you for showing up anyway. She rested a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," she said. "You stood up for every woman still waiting for her day in court and for the ones who'll never get one." It wasn't flattery. It was indictment of a system that needed Emily to survive in silence until it was ready to listen. Of a culture where men like her ex-husband get plea deals and pity, while women get lectured on process. Because here's the cruel joke. America loves redemption stories, as long as the redemption doesn't embarrass the abuser. But today, in a tiny courtroom with peeling linoleum and a rusted water fountain that hadn't worked since Obama's first term, redemption didn't ask permission. And Emily didn't need a gavel to know it. She walked down the steps slowly, still breathing, still shaking. But this time, she was shaking from the aftershock of power reclaimed, not fear relived. And that ex-husband? Well, he walked out with nothing but a lawyer's bill and a face full of failure. Exactly what he deserved. What Emily would do next? That's where the real verdict would be written. The courthouse had been quiet, but this room was quieter. No judge, no gavel, just a soft light humming above the intake desk and a chipped coffee mug that no one ever claimed. Emily had been back at the community center for 2 weeks, no longer a guest, not quite staff, but something in between. They called her a liaison, which was just a polite way of saying someone who's been through it and still shows up. Her job wasn't glamorous. It never made the newsletter. She managed the temporary counseling room, a glorified closet with a folding cot, a stack of clean towels, and a dignity that most courtrooms couldn't manufacture with marble. Late one Thursday night, a woman came in, no name, just a referral. Single mother. 2 kids dropped off with a cousin. Her arm was bruised, her voice flat. Emily got her settled. Clean blanket, warm food, door locked from the inside. She didn't press for details. She'd learned the hard way that sometimes the safest thing you can offer someone is silence. After the woman fell asleep, Emily stayed in the waiting area, alone, still in her shoes. She stared at the walls, which someone had tried to make cheerful with watercolor paintings and inspirational quotes from people who'd never spent the night on the floor with a black eye and a bag of cereal. Something in her twisted. She reached into her tote and pulled out a legal pad. No audience, no agenda, just a compulsion that started in her gut and poured out like water from a pipe no one knew was cracked. She wrote, "If you're scared, I understand. If you think you were stupid for not leaving sooner, I did too. But I'm still here, and you can be too." She didn't sign it, didn't fold it into some grand display. She just slipped the page into an old paperback novel on the bookshelf near the coffee machine. No reason, just instinct. A week passed. Emily forgot the letter. Then came Maribel, mid-30s, sharp cheekbones, dead eyes, one of those women who looked like she used to be someone and had the bad luck to love a man who wanted to erase that. She didn't talk much, just helped mop up the kitchen after dinner and folded other people's laundry like she had something to prove. One afternoon, Maribel was organizing books in the rest nook. Emily was sorting toiletries when she heard her voice quiet, shaking but intentional. "I found something," Maribel said. She held out a folded note, the note. "I don't know who wrote this," she added, "but I needed it." Emily's mouth went dry. That evening, Emily returned to the shelf. In the place where her note had been, a new slip of paper had been tucked. "I read your letter. Tonight, I'm leaving. Thank you for writing when no one else would." That's it. No name, no dramatic punctuation. Just the declaration of a choice, delivered like a verdict. Emily sat down, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the paper like it had just called her back from the edge of something. All that time she'd spent thinking rescue was paperwork. That change needed a case number and a press conference. But sometimes, what saves a life isn't a system or a statute. It's a sentence, not screamed, not tweeted, not performed, just written. Because when you've been treated like property, the most radical thing in the world isn't running. It's realizing you're not alone. And that night, for the first time in a long time, Emily slept deeply. Because someone else had finally walked through the same fire and left footprints. And they were following. It didn't start in a courtroom. It didn't begin in a shelter. It wasn't filed, notarized, or certified by anyone in a suit. Emily's truth was first spoken over a coffee pot and formica table, between exhaustion and surrender when she handed a cup to a stranger who ended up rewriting her story. That was the moment. That was the first breath of freedom. Not the judge, not the law. A damn napkin soaked in caffeine and confession. And now, after the letter from Maribel and the silent echo it left behind, Emily couldn't ignore the feeling anymore that maybe the words we whisper in fear are exactly the ones someone else needs to hear aloud. So she began writing again. Not for herself, not for a court file, but for the ghosts who still walked the halls in borrowed shoes and borrowed time. Sticky notes, torn receipts, index cards she bought with her own money. I survived. You're not weak. You're surviving harder than anyone around you. It's not your fault. She left them in bathroom stalls, taped to the fridge, pinned to the inside of coat pockets at the shelter. No names, no signatures, just truth. Small enough to be ignored by the men who broke them, but loud enough to pull someone back from the edge. It didn't take long for the staff to notice. One intern, bless her young heart, decided to collect the notes into a corkboard near the front desk. She labeled it Sisterhood Board in pink glitter pen, like they were decorating for prom. Emily cringed. "That sounds like something a cosmetics brand would sponsor," she muttered. So she wrote a note of her own. Not motivational, not poetic, just real. "When I told the truth for the first time, I was wiping a table with a coffee-stained rag. My napkin caught more than my tears. It became my first ticket out of the dark. She signed it, Emily D., and below it she wrote in all caps, the Napkin Sisterhood. That name stuck. It was messy, unpolished, but it was hers. Soon, the board wasn't big enough. Women who barely made eye contact during intake were slipping notes into the bookshelves, between shampoo bottles, inside cereal boxes. The notes didn't ask for help. They didn't preach. They just spoke the kind of honesty that doesn't need hashtags, though they got one anyway. Napkin Sisterhood. Started by a sociology professor who volunteered at the center once a week and saw something more radical in those napkins than in any tenure review. Within days, posts began appearing online. Notes photographed next to bruised wrists, notes tucked inside court folders, notes in Spanish, in Urdu, in handwriting so jagged it looked like the pen itself had trembled with memory. No donors, no branding, just pain passed forward so it wouldn't calcify. Emily didn't call it activism. She called it survival with echo. And while political consultants made millions strategizing voter outreach to suburban women, the real movement was unfolding in shelters and break rooms, in gas station bathrooms and budget motels, where napkins said what politicians wouldn't. Because in a nation that treats women like liabilities until they're dead or pregnant, nothing is more dangerous than a truth that fits in your palm and refuses to stay quiet. And so it spread. Not with speeches, but with ink. And the next woman to find one? She wouldn't feel alone. She'd feel invited. It started with a Facebook post. No filter, no hashtag strategy, no influencer tactics, just a paragraph written in the raw, impulsive voice of a 22-year-old volunteer who didn't think anyone would care. I work with a woman who ran from her husband with $83 and a state ID. She never asked for a cent. She just started leaving handwritten notes all over the shelter. And somehow, she changed the rest of us more than we ever changed her. That was it. By midnight, it had 2,000 shares. By sunrise, 40,000. By lunch, comments poured in from every time zone. I used to need a note like that. My sister found hers on a kitchen table. Shai's alive because of it. Thank you for saying what I still can't. The world didn't explode. It leaned in. And Emily... She had no idea it had happened until a local reporter showed up outside the shelter with a voice recorder and a notepad, asking if the napkin lady had a few minutes. She declined. Politely. Firmly. She hadn't written to be seen. She'd written to survive. And visibility, she knew, was a luxury not all survivors could afford. But the next morning, her phone rang. Letitia James. And the voice on the other end wasn't asking. There are times, Letitia said, when silence is a victim's right, but there are also times when speaking is a survivor's responsibility. Emily didn't argue. She just exhaled. 2 days later, she sat in a studio chair under lights that made everything look shinier than it felt. No publicist, no glam squad, no prepared script. Just a woman with her hair in a bun, wearing the same navy blouse she wore to court. The host tried to ease into it. Emily, thank you for being here. Let's start with the obvious. Why napkins? Emily didn't blink. Because napkins get thrown away, she said. So did I. There was a pause. She let it hang. Women like me were taught to be disposable. No savings account, no safe address, no one to call. We're trained to disappear ourselves, but a napkin, at the right moment, in the right hands, can keep someone alive. The room went still. This wasn't daytime TV heartbreak. This was indictment disguised as calm. She didn't cry. She didn't perform. She just told the truth, the way women always have, without fanfare, without footnotes, and with just enough restraint to keep the audience from breaking down too soon. By the time she left the studio, calls were flooding the center. Not for her, for the walls. Women's shelters across the country began clearing space above the microwaves, next to the corkboards, inside the break rooms. They started what they called napkin walls, some with tape and thumbtacks, others with laminated prints, still others with QR codes linking to digital archives. But the message stayed analog. One note, one voice, one chance. And somehow, in a country where senators debate whether trauma counts if it isn't photographed, and headlines forget survivors faster than they remember their ratings, a simple, disposable piece of paper had managed to do what policy never could: make pain visible without making it profitable. Emily didn't ask to be a symbol. She just didn't want anyone else to feel as alone as she once did, wiping tables with trembling hands, wondering if her name still meant anything. But now, across shelters from Boise to Brooklyn, napkins were taped to walls like sacred scripture. And somewhere, some woman with a fresh bruise and no backup plan was reading one, and maybe just, maybe not, giving up. A year later, the Capitol was all marble and memory. Polished shoes echoed through halls where too many voices had once been hushed and too few had ever belonged to women like her. Today, that changed. It was a special congressional hearing, one of those rare bipartisan events where the nameplate said justice, but the real topic was survival. The subject, domestic violence and interstate protection gaps. Translation: why it still takes a woman crossing 3 state lines and filing in 4 jurisdictions just to be legally safe from the man who already tried to kill her once. Letitia James was one of the lead witnesses. She walked in wearing her usual confidence, precision, and zero tolerance for posturing. Just before entering the chamber, she turned to Emily, who sat silently in a navy dress and low heels, hair pinned, hands calm. "The first time I saw you," Letitia said, lowering her voice, "you were shaking while pouring coffee. Today, they'll hear every word you say." Emily nodded. No stage fright, no script, just lived experience wrapped in unshakable poise. When her name was called, she stood and walked forward like someone who didn't need to be rescued anymore. No cue cards, no trembling voice, just presence. She looked the committee in the eye, then began. "Not everyone comes with evidence," she said, voice firm. "Some of us only have faded bruises and voices that crack. But if the legal system only listens to blood, it's not protecting survivors, it's punishing them." The room froze. That kind of clarity doesn't get rehearsed. It's born from the ugly truths no one wants to publish. "I'm not asking for new laws," she continued. "I am asking for old ones to matter, equally, strongly, without requiring a woman to be middle class, well-dressed, and lucky in order to be believed." There was no grand performance, no dramatic music, just facts so raw they blistered. Across the chamber, a senior congressman who'd once boasted about understanding women's issues because he'd watched a lot of Law and Order sat motionless. Beside him, a freshman congresswoman discreetly wiped a tear with the back of her knuckle, just out of camera frame. And when Emily stepped down, there was no applause because congressional protocol forbids clapping during testimony. But the silence that followed wasn't cold. It was reverent, because every person in that room, Democrat, Republican, career bureaucrat, stone-faced aide, knew they hadn't just heard a policy pitch. They'd heard a reckoning. Emily didn't ask for recognition. She didn't want to be called brave. She'd spent years just trying to be safe. But somehow, a woman once discarded like a paper napkin had just walked into the center of American power and handed it a mirror. And behind the veil of procedure, one older lawmaker leaned toward a colleague and muttered, "That girl just spoke for millions." And she had. It could have ended at the hearing. That would have been enough for most people. National stage, congressional spotlight, symbolic victory. But Emily Dawson wasn't built for headlines. She was built for back rooms, folding chairs, and work that didn't come with applause. So, with quiet paperwork arranged through a discreet channel, read Letitia's no-nonsense Rolodex, Emily launched something of her own. New wings, no ribbon cutting, no press conference. Just one donated floor in a church basement that still smelled faintly of candle wax and wet coats. The mission was simple, but surgical. Emergency housing for women escaping abuse, legal aid for those who couldn't afford a retainer, and vocational scholarships for single moms who'd spent more time dodging fists than building arsums. There was a sign over the front door, hand-painted, crooked, and perfect. You don't need proof to walk in here. Just breath. That was the only credential required. Emily still split her time 3 days a week at the original center where she got her start, the rest at New Wings. She refused a salary, said the money should go to diapers and bus passes, still wore the same faded t-shirt, still packed a lunch, still walked to work with a backpack slung low and a coffee that tasted like accountability. She never once called herself a founder. She called herself available. But one afternoon, she found herself back in Queens. Same diner, same table, same cracked leather booth that once caught her breath before she'd even known how to exhale. The old manager hadn't changed much except he now watched CNN on mute and kept a picture of Emily taped inside the register like it was a lucky dollar. "Someone left this for you," he said, sliding a plain white envelope across the counter. No name. Emily hesitated. Her hands still remembered what it was like to open things with shaking fingers. She slipped her thumb under the seal and unfolded a napkin inside. On it, written in blocky, uneven handwriting, "I used to want to die. Then I read about you. I found a lawyer, I'm still here, and I told my daughter. That was all. No hashtags, no QR code, no return address. Just a ripple that reached back and touched the shore it had once launched from." Emily didn't speak. She just sat for a moment, holding the napkin with the same reverence someone else might give to a folded flag. Because the truth was, most empowerment programs never made it this far. Most nonprofits became newsletters. Most stories got sanitized into marketing blurbs. But somehow, this had stayed human. Messy, anonymous, real. A girl who once whispered into the silence now ran a shelter named after the wings she didn't even know she'd earned. And across the country, someone was still writing on napkins, not for attention, but for someone else's second chance. Because the story, it never ended with her. It had only begun. The lights were blinding, but she didn't flinch. National Women's Conference, Washington, D.C., broadcast live. Her name printed in the program between senators and CEOs. And yet, Emily Dawson stepped onto that stage wearing the same old coat she'd worn to her first shelter shift. Hair pulled back. No makeup beyond chapstick. Nothing about her said performance. Everything about her said presence. She didn't walk up to the podium with swagger. She walked up with a folded white napkin in her hand. That was all. No anthem, no slideshow, just the artifact of a truth no one had wanted to hear until it started changing lives. She held the napkin up without drama, but the room fell silent anyway. "I am not an activist," she said, her voice clean, steady, unadorned. "I'm just someone who wasn't listened to." She let that hang. "This," she continued, gesturing to the napkin, "is not evidence. It was never meant for court. It was a scream written down, and somehow it became a voice. No rhetorical flourishes, no self-congratulation, just truth, dropped like a stone in the middle of a glassy lake. And then she placed the napkin on the podium. Not waved, not framed, just left behind, and walked off the stage. Letitia James was waiting at the base of the steps. No cameras, no performative hug, just a simple, silent embrace. Two women who knew the difference between surviving a system and reshaping it. "I don't call you a victim anymore," Letitia said quietly. Emily smiled. "And I don't call myself a hero. I just have a voice now, so I use it." That night, she rode back to the shelter on a late train. No security escort, no luxury suite, no magazine profile waiting in her inbox. Just the quiet company of her thoughts and the weightless ache of a moment completed. Back at the center, the hallway lights flickered softly. The smell of sleep and detergent lingered. She walked to the board where it all began, pulled a pen from her coat pocket, wrote on a new napkin, "If you're still alive, you still get to rewrite the ending." She pinned it at eye level. Just as she stepped back, she noticed a new face in the hallway. A young woman, maybe 20, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, mascara smudged, sleeves pulled long over bruised wrists. She paused in front of the napkin, read the words slowly. Then she smiled. Just a little. But it was real. And that night, for the first time in months, that girl fell asleep without crying. Emily didn't see it. She didn't need to. Because freedom, it doesn't wait for permission, and it doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's written in pen, on a napkin, by someone who finally decided her voice didn't need to be loud, just heard.